when I talk about wealth, it's not just about financial wealth, it's about, time wealth and, freedom and, social wealth, relationships or physical, mental wealth, which is about health. So, sometimes if it's going to cause you anxiety, it's that, you want to look after your health and your anxiety level. So pay your mortgage off first.
Vix, sitting in England right now. It's a pleasure to have you on KEAL. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. And I really, really thank you for being on this episode of KEAL. And we're going to talk about, for all of our listening audience, viewing audience, about personal finance. And I think now more than ever, especially what the pandemic taught us about our own money and in the current state of things and for the future, that we need to really, really adhere to how we spend our money, and not just for today, but for the future, because we don't know what circumstances might bring us in our personal life, in the economy, globally. And we're trying to make you as well prepared and think very deeply on the importance of this and hopefully take something away with it. And I have the pleasure of speaking with Vix. And Vix, please introduce yourself to our audience, a little bit about who you are, why you focus on personal finance and how you help people in that manner, and why this is generally an important theme for you.
Okay, yeah. So I'm now a money wealth coach, and I work mainly with women and helping them create and build wealth so that they can live the life they want. And the reason I focus on women is because there's a gender pay gap, a gender wealth gap, a gender investment gap. I mean, lots of gender gaps, and which we need to address and we need to close. So what I do is, my main area is really financial empowerment of women. So it's about financial education, which enables financial empowerment. And my background is accountancy, economics, in the corporate world. I've worked for a long time in that kind of corporate world. I actually had my own business, economics consultancy, but I'm effectively closing that down. So you could say I'm effectively retired now, and what I'm doing is my passion project, which is basically to empower women to kind of make good financial decisions so that they can create and grow wealth and they can live the lives that they want.
And what is it that generally led you down this path to want to do this? Like, was there, you talk about like some of these issues with the inequality of pay and everything else, which is definitely an issue. But is there something like a circumstance that happened in your life in particular that you said, okay, I need to help people in this way because I really have a, desire to do it, but also like when did that come about that is like, I really...
Well, in some ways it came about a long time ago, which going back, over 20 years. And it's when I turned 36 actually, because by that age, I was older than the age at which my mother was when she died. And it was then that I decided I need to get my finances together. I think before that, I kind of thought, I'm here for a good time, not a long time. And then, because my mother had died young, I had a sister that died young as well. And I suddenly thought, actually, I might be here for a while and I want to live a great life. So I'm going to get my finances together. But that was kind of in the back of my mind. And then, over the next 20 years, I've worked at creating wealth for myself, building wealth. And also, I didn't really notice I was doing it at the time, but often talking to friends, often giving them advice about what to do with their money. And it was really only when, a year or so ago when I thought about, what do I want to be doing now? I wanted to do something different. I don't want to be working in the corporate world. But I thought, this is what I should be doing. This is I felt that I'd found my why. So in many ways, I think it took me a long time to find my why. And it's really, my why is about helping women become financially empowered to close these gender gaps. So I say that, I found it maybe a couple of years ago, but in actual fact, this started like just over 20 years ago.
So Vix, when you work with your clients, what is the first approach you take for someone who's really, really trying to come to grips with this, the women that you work with, as far as like the fundamental principles start with in understanding personal finance? How do you take that approach with them?
Yeah, well, where I start, and this is in particular with one-to-one work, is where are you now and where do you want to be? And and try to identify the gaps. But one thing that comes up a lot is, my work is mainly around the practical side of, managing your money. But something I see that comes up a lot is this emotional side, the kind of money mindset issues. And, a lot of the time people are coming or women are coming to me and they have a lot of emotions around money, like shame, guilt, fear, anxiety. So one thing I do find is you have to work on that side, the emotional side of kind of managing money, as well as the practical side of managing money. And I always start, one of the first things I always start is whatever financial decisions you made in the past that were wrong, forgive yourself. Because, we can be really hard on ourselves, can't we, sometimes? And I shouldn't have done that, or I shouldn't have done that. That's in the past. You're now, you've decided that things are going to change. So forgive yourself for all those past mistakes. So that's one of my, the first places I start, which is kind of unusual, but I think it's important.
And it's interesting you say that with emotion, because a lot of that I would imagine, has to do with actual discipline. So, I mean, have you dealt with, clients in the past where having the discipline not to have more than one credit card, max it out, and have that as a compulsion because there are a lot of people in that situation, unfortunately. How do you feed into that way of advising them to stay disciplined with tracking their expenses and, motivating them to stay on track?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my clients are kind of doing mindset works, but really focusing not just on money mindset, but mindset overall, kind of at the same time. So I kind of pick up the money stuff. And you're right, like this whole thing about, having lots of credit cards and emotional spending is a big thing, isn't it? The plastic, fantastic. You go shopping and you spend money and I'll just put up my credit card. I'll worry about it later. I mean, that is really, really common. So it's about trying to understand, what is it that is making you behave in that way? So what are the emotions associated with it that make you behave that way? And if you think about debt, for example, I mean, a lot of people work really hard to get out of debt and they have to be so disciplined to do it. And then what happens? They're back in debt again. And I think there's lots of analogies with, managing money and managing your weight, because it's the same thing. People go on diets and they lose weight, and then it's actually easier to lose the weight than it is to maintain the weight loss. So I think it's the same. There's a really strong analogy between managing your weight and managing your money.
For sure. Yeah, because I mean, in the end, we're all human, and every sort of thing, activity we do, thought, whatever, has some intrinsic emotion attached to it. And it can go either one way or the other. And then, everything precipitously affects the outcome of that in the end. So, yeah, I mean, it's trying to stay within, I would imagine, like a certain thread of your way of being in the end that can either lead to a very good path versus a not so good one, And
the analogy I immediately think of is, if you go on a really strict diet, for example, or a really strict budget, and you can sustain that for a certain amount of time. But, if you deprive yourself constantly, like I can't spend money on this or I can't eat that, then eventually you kind of get frustrated and want to give up. So you're better having something that is to have an approach that's much more sustainable. So allow yourself, even if you've got debt and you're trying to pay back it, allow yourself a little bit of money in your kind of spending plan to have fun, because everyone deserves to have fun.
100%. Yeah. I mean, all about balance, right? Like having a certain way of discipline for this thing and then work hard towards another. And then you got to have the pleasure part, because otherwise you're just can become either too rigid or too lax one way or the other. The pendulum will swing, the way it would in that way. And, I'm interested as well, because you're talking about a lot of this idea behind the emotion with it as well. How does that, do you have a certain way in which you help these women, especially is it different speaking to someone if they're totally on their own and single and have their own life and their own way of spending their own money versus, someone in a family situation or a partner who also loves to spend money? I mean, because that can be quite difficult if you're with other people and they just spend like crazy too. So how does that work?
I think you're right. I think obviously it's, if you're dealing with a single person and it's just their money and just their money mindset you're dealing with, it's clearly easier. But then, if you're dealing with someone who's in a relationship or in a family situation, it also depends on how they've decided to manage their money. And, there's no right or wrong way to manage your money in a relationship or in a family, whether, it's all pulled together in one account or you maintain separate accounts. It's what's right for, these people, but it's about how you make decisions within it. But so, for example, one thing I see in relationships in terms of how you manage money is when your partner can be critical of things that you decide to spend your money on. And usually that's because you have different values. So, for example, one of my values is adventure. So I like to travel and I like to spend money on travel. Now, if I was with someone who didn't like that, they would think, well, that's a waste of money to spend your money on travel. You're better off spending on something else, Or I was in a relationship previously with someone who was really into motorbikes and tinkering with his motorbike and would buy all these parts. Oh, why are you doing this? You spend so much time. And then he sells the motorbikes, but he doesn't make that much money on them. I couldn't see the business sense, but it was much later when I started to understand, money a bit better that I realized actually for him, that was more about the enjoyment of doing it. So it's about accepting that you're in a relationship or a family, you're all different people and different things will give you joy. And I always talk about, if you're making a spending decision, ask yourself the question, does this bring me joy in a Marie Kondo kind of way? On a scale of 1 to 10, and how much joy will this bring me? And if it's 5, why are you spending money on that? It should be an 8, or maybe even it should be a 9 or a 10. If it doesn't spark amazing joy. And in relationships, you ask 2 people, they'll have give different numbers to the same, spending decision. So you've got to take that into account and allow a little bit of leeway.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it is probably a bit of work, but if you can strike the right balance with it, it can be more than manageable, I can imagine, right? I mean, it's about
ultimately it's about communication, isn't it? It's being open and honest, but also I say it's about being accepting. It's about accepting that your different things bring joy to your partner, and therefore your partner will want to spend money on things that you personally wouldn't want to spend money on. And it's about within the relationship and within the family or the relationship money, about allowing that to happen.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And, it kind of leads me to this, going back what you were talking about briefly with debt before, because honestly, debt's probably more than half the battle in many ways, unfortunately. And especially in really uncertain economic times, like when there's crazy inflation and then you got debt and then you got other expenses, that can be totally a very miserable situation. So what's normally your approach when you're, working with your clients as far as debt goes? Do you start with certain items to go after first, or approaches to tackle immediately and then, like a short, medium, long-term kind of scenario?
Yeah, and obviously, I think you're right with debt. And again, there's emotions associated with debt. There can be a lot of anxiety or shame or things like that. And, with debt, there's good debt and bad debt. So good debt could be your mortgage or your education, assuming it's worthwhile spending that money on education. But a lot of debt we see is bad debt. Basically, people spending money that they don't have, and a lot of the time on things that they don't need or don't even really want. So then it's a matter of how do they pay it back. So the first thing I do, again, is if someone wants to address their debt, it's kind of, forgive yourself for getting into debt. Give yourself a pat on the shoulder, because the first step to paying off your debt is acknowledging it. And, a lot of people don't even know how much their total debts are. And so making them do that exercise and calculate it. And the first, a couple of things I do in terms of before I look at how you would pay off the debt. But the first one is, what can you do to reduce that debt? mean, if you've got a lot of credit card debt, can you ring your credit card providers and say to them, look, I'm in debt. I really want to address this. I really want to pay it off. What can you do to help me? Can you give me a lower interest rate? Because if you can reduce the amount of your debt, then that will help you. And from the credit card company perspective, they want you to pay it back. And more often than not, they will try and help. So I think that's something to think about. But I think in terms of paying off your debt, now you'll see personal finance experts talk about different methods. One is the avalanche method, where you list all your debts in order of interest rate from highest to lowest, and you pay the one with the highest interest rate first, because that's the most cost efficient way. If you pay that first, then you're not going to pay that high interest rate over a long period of time. Or you can do the snowball approach, which is where you list your debts by the smallest one first, and you pay the smallest one off first, because then that gives you a quick win. So this is where I say, in actual fact, and some people will choose one method over the other, but I actually say it depends on the personality of the person who's in debt. Because if you're someone that needs that quick win to keep going and to keep on track, then use that snowball method. Pay off the smallest debt first, because you'll be able to pay a debt off quickly, have a quick win, think, yay, I'm doing it. But if you're someone who's kind of, doesn't want to pay any extra money, then use the avalanche method, because you'll pay less money overall. So I think it's really personality based. And because, at the end of the day, what you want to do is get out of debt, and what approach is going to work best for the person to help them get out of debt. So I often talk about it, the different strategies, and ask them which approach is going to work best for you and why, and talk about it that way.
I like that you put that uniqueness on the person, because all these items of personal finance have so much to do with your life day to day, and we're all very unique people. So it's not a one size fits all thing. I mean, there's general guides and advices to certain things, but in the end, it's what's great about your work is that you tailor the situation with the person and say, okay, this is how we'll get you on this track based on what you're trying to achieve and where you are right now. So I think that's a great approach, And
after all, if you think about it, personal finance, the clue's in the name, personal. Yeah, it's personal to you. And, there's a lot of personal finance advice out there. And I always say you need to, and it's quite generic, and it depends on the person and your individual situation. And that's why I do this, where are you now? And then talk through it with a person to figure out what we need to do first. And it's not, I kind of have a general thing like an emergency fund first, then pay off high interest debt. But it depends on the person, because if they're in such a lot of anxiety with the debt that they're in, I would almost focus on paying that debt off first rather than building the emergency fund, which goes against the grain and what I generally recommend. And that's because, it's about what works for the person.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it can be there's just so many different levers to pull in a way. It's like, okay, you're here. How do you want to get to this like state of peace in a way? Because if like the way in which you help guide them, at least to get to a sense of peace, that can bring even more clarity to tackle everything else. Right. But like you said, those quick wins can then bring like, okay, I got that. How do we do this now? How do we do this now? Instead of like everything making you feel like you're stuck, It's
like a question I'm often asked is with clients, and they've got a mortgage and they're told, and they want to pay their mortgage off, because they want to be mortgage free. But, all the personal finance advice is don't pay your mortgage off, because, your mortgage rate is low, like it's 2%, 3%. You're going to earn a lot more money by investing it. And that makes, that advice makes total sense. But if you've got someone who doesn't like debt, who feels a lot of anxiety about it, it's like, okay, pay your mortgage off first. It's not a big deal. If you're going to make, because it's not just about the money. When I talk about wealth, it's not just about financial wealth. It's about, time wealth and, freedom and, social wealth, relationships and or physical, mental, wealth, which is about health. So, sometimes if it's going to cause you anxiety, it's that, you want to look after your health and your anxiety level. So pay your mortgage off first. So it's not 100% clear cut, and it's not always about doing the thing which makes the most financial sense. And that's because of this emotional side of money.
Sure. 100%. And I'm really interested, especially on and we're not trying to give investing advice or tell you what to do or none of that, neither of us, because I mean, you should research on your own in the end and figure out what's best for you. But just generally speaking on the topic of investing, Vix, because I think people get a little bit worried about the topic. Okay, I got to pay attention all the time to the stock market and do that daily and make sure I can, adjust, my trade or my whatever, it seems like a big complicated science in a way, but I don't think necessarily has to be, especially with a lot of these other, you could call them quote unquote products out there like ETFs and everything else where just set and forget.
Yeah.
I mean, those kind of evolutions as well has made probably investing a lot easier for many people, just so they can, put money aside for a future, but not get overburdened with fees and everything else and kind of forget about it. Would you say that that exists, in a way that can make people comfortable to invest?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of myths associated with investing, aren't there? And one of them is that you have to be monitoring all the time, or it's risky, or it's impossible to pick the right stocks and shares, or you have to be rich. I mean, all these kind of things are not true. You don't have to be rich. You can start with a very small amount, like, $10, £10 a month, whatever. You can do it on an app now. You don't have to ring your stockbroker and say, I want to pick these shares. But I think the key thing is that, as you say, you've now got these ETFs, these funds. And so, for example, the S&P 500 is a fund which tracks the S&P 500, which is an index of 500 large companies in the US. So you can invest in that fund and you get exposure to 500 large companies in the US. You don't have to choose which one of those you want to invest in. And over time, or since inception, the S&P 500 on average has returned around 10% per year. Now, some years it's more than that, some years it's less than that, some years it goes down. That's one thing. Stock markets ebb and flow, they go up and down. So yeah, you can invest in a fund really easily, and a 10% return is pretty good. I mean, look at what you get in your savings account at the moment. I mean, you're lucky to get 0.5% here. And I don't know if you've heard of the rule of 72. I'm sure you have, but the rule of 72 tells you the amount of time it takes to double your money based on a certain rate of return. So the formula is time equals 72 divided by the rate of return. So if you're getting 10% from the S&P 500, it's T, a little bit of maths here, equals 72 divided by 10%. So that's 7.2 years. So you invest in something like the S&P 500, it'll take you 7.2 years to double your money. That's pretty good. Compare that to saving money in the bank when you're getting, let's even be generous and saying you get 1% interest. Well, by that same formula, it's going to take you 72 years to double your money. So when you put it in that context, it's kind of like, why aren't you investing? This is where you can create wealth. And this is all due to compound interest, which, Einstein called the eighth wonder of the world, which is where you're earning interest on interest on interest on interest over time.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And, the thing is, I think in the end, with all this, getting your house in order with your finances and, having good prospects for your investing and not making it overcomplicated, it ultimately leads to that. I don't know if you agree or not, this conclusion of, money is a tool towards freedom in a certain way. Freedom in the sense that, however you want to be relaxed with the way you want to live your life and pay for things you need to pay for, it can be a tool to get there, right? I think ultimately, if people see it in that way, they'll understand the importance of doing these things, I would imagine, no?
Yeah, and exactly. I mean, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. Like, money is a tool. It's not, it's energy, really. It's not good, it's not bad. A lot, and that's another thing about, the mindset thing, is that a lot of people have these kind of use all these subconscious beliefs about money, that rich people are bad, or I shouldn't want money. And these are beliefs, subconscious beliefs from way back, that we carry with us. And I always say there's nothing wrong with wanting money. There's nothing wrong with wanting to live a good life. So, and money can enable that. So money's an enabler, really.
Yeah. It's an enabler, and it's like you're saying, it's an inanimate object, right? So it's there to do certain things and get you where you need to go, like for the way we live in this modern society. So, and Vix, just one last question I want to ask you, and this has just been a really enlightening conversation and just really, really helpful, at least just getting around this general idea of your money, and especially how it has to do with your mindset and finance. And I encourage all of our viewers and listeners, if you want to go really in depth about your situation after watching this, connect with Vix, and we'll include all of her information in the show notes, the description, the pinned comments, everywhere, as we always do. And my last question, Vix, is especially with women, maybe even if they have kids, right? Is there, by curiosity, any sort of way in which you help them in a secondary way, help their own kids come to this realization of the importance of money? Does that ever filter into the way in which you also help women, is helping the rest of their family in a certain way to get to grips with money, especially for the little kids running around the house, if they have any?
Yeah, and I think you're raising a really important question. And one thing a lot of my clients talk about is this whole thing of generational wealth, that when they want to build wealth, they want to build wealth not just for themselves, but for their children and their children's children. So, generational wealth is a bit of a buzzword at the moment. And I always say that, when women have money, it has a ripple effect on their families and in their communities. So part of financially educating my clients means that, and something that I talk about a lot, is the importance of talking about money. So not, with their children, with their partner, with their friends, because, money is a bit of a taboo subject. We don't talk about money. There's been surveys that show that people would rather talk about sex and money. So, it's such a taboo topic. So encouraging, women to talk about money means that they'll talk about it with their children. And I sometimes get asked, how should I talk to my child about this, or what should I do for my child so that she or he doesn't have the same kind of money blocks that I've had. And I'm not an expert on, giving, personal finance education for children, but my belief is that if you just talk openly and honestly and just talk about it and make it not a big deal, this is what money does. We use money to pay for this, and, we make money and then we spend money. We're going to invest this money. And one of the key things I think is good to talk to children about is trade-offs. We've got a little pot of money. Either we can have this, thing A that you want, or thing B that you want, but we can't have both. So, how would you like to spend the money? And, children can be involved in family decisions about, should we go on holiday or should we get a new car? It just teaches them little things. And often parents have these discussions, and don't involve the children. But if you involve the children from a young age, then they start to feel more confident about money and understand, some of the financial decisions that we need to make, that they'll need to make later in life.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it can even be fun for them enough to, know the importance of it at such a young age, and then carry on that quote unquote game for the rest of their life, but in a way that builds that wealth, and then trying to get to the, let's say, quote unquote trophy of having longevity and their wealth management. So it could be, hopefully that could be taught in more schools at a young age.
Yeah, I'd love to see it taught in schools. And also I think that, if you want to build generational wealth because you want to leave money to your children and then their children's children, well, the most important thing is actually that you give your children financial education, because there's a lot of studies that show that, wealth that's handed down in generations disappears after a couple of, or 90% of it is gone after a couple of generations, because obviously the people don't know how to manage it. So I would say one of the best things you can give your children is financial education. And I know that people out there, outside the school system that are doing things to help parents teach their children, or, for teens, I think that's really important.
Totally agree. I think that is just spot on, and hopefully just precipitously grows in more and more places all over the world. And we can have a lot more. I would say it would bring a lot of the global stress down in many ways, because you would tackle the money part of it, and then we would probably have a happier world in the end too. So, Vix, it's been a pleasure to have you on this episode of DevKEAL. I'm honored. It was really, really great insights on all these issues around finance, and especially with a lot of the other elements and variables that go into that are part of our everyday life. So I do thank you very much. And where can women especially connect with you, follow you, and maybe work with you more personally and trying to get on the right track in their life? Where can they connect with you?
Well, I've got a website, which is retirerichwithvix.com. I have a Facebook page, Retire Rich. On Instagram, I'm vix.munro, but I do have a free Facebook group for women, a woman in particular interested in joining, which is called the Retire Rich.
All right, Vix, that's perfect. So we'll make sure to include all of your information in all of our platforms. Please make sure to connect with Vix, everyone out there, especially women, in just really getting on the track of your life with money, so you get that element of your life sorted and have less stress, and you can focus on things that you really truly enjoy and want to focus on in your life. So thank you very much, Vix. Sorry, I'm scrambling my words. It's been a pleasure, and I do thank you for this incredible conversation together.
Oh, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed it. My favorite topic.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Vix, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Take care, everyone.